Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. This week, we'll be sharing a conversation about what lawmakers and interest groups are doing about attack mail and election misinformation, as we're in the full swing of election season now in August. But before we get into that, let's get a quick local news roundup. I'm joined here by Ivy Seacrest, our crime and public safety reporter, and Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter. Ivy, let's start with you.
Yeah, so this past week, it's just been small motions along ongoing cases. So like we brought up in the first episode, there is the coin shop murders that happened in 2015. The main suspect in that, Douglas Smith, he pled not guilty in his arraignment hearing last week. And he also, again, requested that bail be posted for him. Bail has not been posted for him, although we'll see if that changes based on whether or not the DA decides to press for the death penalty. Bail was posted, however, for the bank robber who on Thursday committed a double bank robbery, and on Friday, the K-9 who took down the bank robber, Maverick, went and visited the tellers who were impacted by the bank robber. He got a goodie basket and things like that. So in happier news, the K-9 who took down that bank robber was greatly appreciated by the local community.
Great. Thanks, Ivy. Now, Taylor, what's going on with you?
There's always lots of stuff going on in entertainment. So specifically this weekend, other than the Laramie County Fair, there's 2 concerts at the Lincoln. Chris Cagle, who's a country artist, and Daniel Nicole, who's a blues artist. And then there's the Barlow coming to Fridays on the Plaza. The Farmers Market kicks off this Saturday from 7 a.m. to 1, and then that goes until October every Saturday. Also, the Shine Arts Celebration is on Saturday. And then next week for entertainment, there's the Wyoming Aviation Fest, and also the True Troupe is putting on a Shakespeare play, a little play on Much Ado About Nothing. But yeah, there's articles on most of those things except for the Lincoln. So if you want more details, check those articles out.
Thank you, Taylor and Ivy, for bringing us the latest on that. Now we're going to hear from Hannah Shields about attack mailers and what's going on in the state government regarding election misinformation.
Attack mailers are basically, it's a type of political messaging, I think more formally called electioneering. And it's mailed out to voters, and they will typically have a message targeting a specific lawmaker or a candidate for statewide office, or even sometimes our executive officials, such as Secretary of State Chuck Gray. These attack ads often spread half-truths or misinformation about an elected official or the candidate for a statewide office. But because these attack mailers are usually anonymous, it's hard to track down who is sending them. And it's not a new issue in Wyoming. They've actually been infiltrating the past few election cycles here, but lawmakers are growing more and more concerned. And I think this year there's been a lot of discussion from lawmakers and, different political organizations about this issue. The most recent thing that's happened, Wildfire reported that there was a launch of a defamation lawsuit after Republican Rock Springs representatives J.T. Larson and Cody Wiley were recently targeted in a mailer for voting to remove former President Donald Trump, who is now the Republican presidential nominee for re-election, from the Wyoming ballot.
Most of you have heard in the news lately that there have been mailers circling around our state that have inaccurate claims about legislators making votes on things that we never voted on. One of those accusations was that I voted to take Trump off of the ballot, which we never took a vote on that. So I just think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of this if we don't address it as a state. A lot more lies coming out in political campaigns, and maybe not even direct lies, but just misleading voters. And it seems interesting to me that the same people who tout election integrity are the ones that are lying about certain votes. So and therefore taking away the integrity from the process.
So the Wyoming Freedom Political Action Committee was the group responsible for sending out those mailers. So basically, the issue around that is, like the fact that, first of all, it's a complete lie. That has never happened. They never took that vote. Critics speculate that attack mailers are a source of dark money, a term that refers to the contributions from anonymous political donors who hide their identity behind political action committees, also known as PACs. A Supreme Court ruling in 2010, Citizens United versus FEC, decided that corporations were protected under the First Amendment and were allowed to donate money to election campaigns as a form of free speech. So when it comes to regulating free speech, that is a very difficult thing to bring a lawsuit against just because it is a protected First Amendment right. So you really have to make sure that there is proven harm under strict scrutiny in order to win those lawsuits. And it's very, very difficult, especially when it comes to campaigns and election cycles. It's even harder to bring a defamation lawsuit under these kinds of situations. One of Governor Mark Gordon's goals is to stop, if not slow down, the spread of misinformation in Wyoming's election cycles from these attack mailers. So the Prosperity and Commerce PAC, also known as the PAC, it was founded in 2018, and they launched this new website called factcheckwyoming.com. That's how you find it, but the whole initiative is called Trust But Verify Wyoming. And so basically, it kind of acts as a resource for voters who receive these attack mailers. It has a list of candidates and incumbents for statewide office, which the PAC chairman, Mark Macy, told me the list of candidates who seem to be mistreated the most by out-of-state interest groups. So basically what a person can do is they can go onto the website. If they received an attack mailer regarding any of those people on that website, they can reach out to them directly, either through their phone or through their email, and kind of get the information from that person themselves. That's kind of the nice thing about being Wyoming is how easy it is to actually kind of directly contact our state lawmakers. So voters definitely have that option. Another thing that Macy told me is that the idea behind this wasn't to pit any sort of political groups against each other, whether it's the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, the Wyoming Caucus. The only thing is to just act as a fact check resource for voters who receive these mailers. But it is important to note that this PAC does work independently of the governor's office. It is not run by Governor Mark Gordon, although from what Mark Macy has told me, they're definitely in conversations with the governor. The PAC is mainly made up of a group of volunteers. They're not state employees. They don't work for the governor's office, but they do work to, I guess maybe carry out the governor's goals. At least that's what Mark Macy told me. And obviously one of his goals is to slow down the spread of misinformation. So that's what they were doing with the launch of this website. There's been a lot of discussions with lawmakers on how to address this issue. For example, with the Wyoming Legislature's Blockchain Committee, they're talking about AI regulations and how that can fit into political campaigns and how they can stop the spread of misinformation there. So they're kind of looking at that through AI technology. Probably the most interesting thing that just happened was during the Wyoming Legislature's Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions Committee meeting last week on Wednesday. So they're kind of in the final hour of their 2-day meeting. And during the public comment portion, Representative Larson, who's one of the plaintiffs in the defamation lawsuit, said, he spoke during the public testimony period, and he spoke as a candidate for House District 17 and not as a lawmaker. And he just basically wanted to address the news reports of these attack mailers circling around the state, making, quote, inaccurate claims, unquote. One of which he claimed, had said that he had voted to remove Donald Trump from the ballot, which never happened. So in response to this, one of the co-chairs of the committee, Senator Cale Case, who's a Republican from Lander, said this was definitely a subject that he was interested in. He and I have spoken about it before for other articles I've done regarding this topic. But, given the time from when this situation was being brought up, he was saying there's really not a lot that could be done at this moment.
The ability of this committee do anything about that in a timely manner for this election is absolutely zero. So, but it is important to register the concerns and the concerns of people all around Wyoming, because we all want elections to be fair and honest. And so I suspect the big picture is that this committee will debrief after the election, and we'll go into the next interim with the idea of looking at what happened in this election and to kind of drill down on that. Free speech is a very, very powerful constitutional right, and to require to infringe on that is a very big deal.
So the next person to talk was Representative Mike Yin, who's a Democrat from Jackson. And he brought up a Cowboy State Daily article where Crook County GOP had given money to the PAC, the Freedom PAC that had sent out those flyers. And he questioned whether one of those groups was breaking the law and if it's being investigated.
And so I do have a concern on whether one of those groups is breaking the law, and whether that's being investigated in any way, because there is a statute, and that was in the reporting, that disallows a party from participating in choosing one candidate over another within that party primary.
Yin, when he asked that question, during that meeting, both Secretary of State Chuck Gray, and in his position, he is responsible for overlooking all of Wyoming's elections, and his chief policy officer, Joe Rubino, were both in the audience. And so Yin directed his question at Rubino and asked him to approach the microphone and testify before lawmakers. So Rubino comes up and he says, all filed complaints to the Secretary of State of office, are taken pretty seriously.
Yeah, we take all election complaints very seriously, all allegations of any alleged violation of the election code very seriously. And, we'll review those when we receive them.
Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, is Mr. Rubino saying that you need an actual complaint for you to conduct an investigation, or are you going to conduct an investigation into that PAC based on that reporting?
Mr. Rubino.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, are you referring to Act Blue?
So one thing to know in the context of this situation is just a few days earlier, Gray had publicly announced the investigation into another political action committee, Act Blue, which Gray said during the committee, the investigation was started because of these widespread reports and anecdotal references given about the organization and questioning the legality of how it was performing. He said that was what started this investigation.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rubino, so there is a press release saying that the Secretary of State's office is investigating at the Act Blue PAC. And so my concern is that there is also a PAC that, based on the reporting, looks like it is violating the law. Is this something that the Secretary's office will investigate, or does a complaint need to be filed to make that happen?
Well, Secretary of State
thank
Gray.
you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, certainly invite you to submit a complaint if you'd wish to do that. Act Blue, there are wide reports of Act Blue filing straw donations, and we take that very seriously, as I hope you do, that straw donations are very problematic and illegal behavior. So we're investigating Act Blue. We take all complaints seriously.
Statute 22-25-104 says, that no political party funds shall be expended directly or indirectly in the aid of the nomination of one person as against another person in the same political party. To which the other co-chair of the committee, Representative Jared Olson, a Republican from Cheyenne, he said it was basically a pretty interesting legal question coming out of that. Gray's ultimate response to all of this was that he has yet to hear a Title 22 issue with these attack mailers. He said that no formal complaint had been filed with the Secretary of State's office, And that was true until today, when the Cowboy State Daily reported that Senate President Ogden Driscoll officially filed a complaint against the PAC over the $25,000 check from the Crook County GOP that was sent to the Wyoming Freedom PAC, which had originally been responsible for sending out the mailers. So another sitting member of the committee, Representative Bill Landon, also kind of pushed the Secretary of State on, why he hasn't taken any action yet.
I would just say, in a general sense, Mr. Secretary, I've had so many constituents come to me this year on the question of elections. A, is there any investigation or oversight as to who's reporting what? B, what are we going to do about misleading and outright lies in mailers? I'm not saying we can do anything about them, but I respectfully disagree with the representative of Wheatland. This is our bailiwick. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And it's a very real concern out there. I wonder if you share the concern about what's going on in our Wyoming politics now.
And I mean, the only response that Gray really gives in regard to all of this is that, he mentions he's been reading a lot about the Civil War period and early American history, and just, basically said there's always been a vibrant back and forth in politics. And, said he's like, this is something that's going to happen in politics. But, we'll see what happens. According to the Cowboy State Daily, since Driscoll filed that official complaint with the Secretary of State's office, Gray responded that it would be forwarded straight to the Attorney General for investigation.
Okay, so just this week there was an article by the LA Times about the epidemic of invisibility in Hollywood. So I really wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that, because the article reported on a study that found a regression of representation in media, and they used Barbie as a prime example, saying that even though it dominated box office records last year, that 2023 actually marked a year of regression of women in film, which I thought was really interesting. It also kind of said that the overall ratio of men and women with speaking roles in these popular films has remained relatively unchanged since 2007, which is kind of crazy considering it's 2024. But yeah, I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts on diversity in media and films nowadays, and how you think that's improved and where it's headed, and all your thoughts.
Yeah, so Taylor and I were actually talking about this in the office earlier, and one of the key points about this topic that I think is really interesting to bring up is the way in which representation is done. So if you look at the Barbie movie, or you look at other more recent films focused on identity, you can see kind of this clear change between having complex characters who happen to have that identity as a part of their focus, and then having complex characters whose identity is the main purpose of their role in the plot. Mm-hmm. And while I think both of those have like really valuable aspects to them, I do think it's really interesting that we tend to gravitate towards like including people for the sake of being performative, as opposed to writing stories that happen to include people.
And authentically, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a big problem with that too is like casting people who are not necessarily in those diversity groups, and also films, specifically films, but this goes for all media, just not being made by people in those minority groups either, which I think is the biggest problem, and that's what kind of makes it a little inauthentic and more performative. I thought it was getting better, but then when I read this article and it said like it really has been unchanged since 2007, I'm like, that's crazy. So I feel like there's like a loud minority of films and media things out there that I thought were really like great and stand out, but I guess it's not getting better, which is kind of a bummer. But I guess that's why like Barbie was such a big deal last summer, and like it was this huge pinnacle of women leading, or a woman leading in a film, and it was such a big spectacle versus it just being a thing, you know?
Right. It was a little bit of like a mini phenomena. It was, it garnered a lot of attention. I do think it's interesting that they say it hasn't changed much since 2007, because I do think there is something to be acknowledged that a lot of representation really did change up to 2007. Like,
Yes.
like there has been a lot of change and a lot of progress, and we should like applaud that. But my favorite example is The Little Mermaid with Halle Berry. I am incredibly pro having the remakes of different like classic fairy tales include Black women and include different actors. But I also think it sparked a really interesting conversation about why we don't write independent stories as opposed to inserting people of color into already existing stories.
Yeah.
And not to say that there's only one way to do that or that it should be done way as opposed to the other, but I honestly think, and maybe Noah might have something to say about this, I think it comes down to wanting to pay writers and wanting to pay for creativity and garner new talent as opposed to making the cash grab of remaking something that people already like.
That's so fair. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ivy, and also Hannah Shields and Noah Zahn for chatting with me and talking about news this week. We'll see you next Wednesday.